They lied to you about the plant, not because it was dangerous, but because it was powerful. You were never meant to know that cannabis is older than your governments, holier than your churches, and more conscious than the systems that vilified it. They didn't criminalize it to protect your mind. They did it to stop you from accessing it. Because deep down they knew, when used with reverence, this plant doesn't numb you, it wakes you up. This isn't about getting high. This is about getting free. Before there were pharmaceuticals, before there were textbooks and television, there were sacred plants. Cannabis was one of them. It was smoked by sages, eaten by mystics, burned in temples, and whispered about in secret. Not for fun, but for truth. And now, Thoth speaks, not to introduce you to the plant, but to remind you of what you've forgotten. You were never supposed to light up to escape reality. You were meant to light up to remember it. Long before it was labeled illegal, before it was dismissed as a vice for the lazy or the lost, cannabis was sacred. Not metaphorically, literally. It was woven into the rituals of priesthoods, burned as incense in holy sanctuaries, brewed into the elixirs of mystics, and passed hand to hand in circles where truth wasn't spoken, it was felt. The plant wasn't entertainment. It was an initiation. In ancient temples of Kemet, the land you now call Egypt, cannabis was a bridge. Thoth, the keeper of wisdom, the scribe of the gods, stood not with scrolls and quills, but with frequency and vibration, offering humans the tools to access their divine essence. And among those tools, the Green Teacher. It was never about escape. It was about access. Access to the unseen. To the inner realms where your soul lives beyond the illusions of the world you've been conditioned to obey. You see, when something opens your eyes, when it invites you to question everything you've accepted as normal, it becomes dangerous to those who profit from your blindness. So they rebranded the sacred as sinful. They took a key to divine consciousness and made it a punchline in a stoner joke. The image was twisted. Weed became the lazy man's crutch, the rebel's rebellion, the addict's excuse. But that was never its origin. That was the cover story. The truth? They feared the plant not because it made you forget, but because it made you remember. Remember what? That you are not just a worker, a taxpayer, a follower of schedules and rules. You are awareness. You are life, expressing itself through form. And the systems that hold power over you can only survive if you forget that. When cannabis is used with reverence, not recreation, it disrupts the noise. It slows the chaos of your thoughts. It gently silences the conditioned voice in your head that says, fit in, be normal, don't question. And in that silence, a new voice emerges. Not louder, truer. It's the part of you that never left the divine realm, the part of you that still remembers. But they couldn't let you have that. So they created a war, not on the plant, but on perception itself. A war on your ability to see clearly, to feel deeply, to ask, what else have they hidden from me? And here's the part they don't want you to hear on platforms like this. Some truths are too ancient and too forbidden for YouTube. That's why we created Insights Academy, a free newsletter where we share what can't be spoken here. Sign up through the link in the description to receive a free digital copy of The Kabbalion, only available for a limited time. The criminalization of cannabis wasn't just political, it was metaphysical. By disconnecting you from the sacred plant, they disconnected you from yourself. Because cannabis isn't a substance, it's a mirror. It reflects what you're afraid to see. That's why some fear it. That's why others crave it. And that's why the wise have always approached it with caution and clarity. You don't use it to forget the world, you use it to wake up from it. This is why Thoth returns, not to preach, but to remind. You are not here to blindly follow. You are here to remember, to realign, to reclaim what has always been within you. And the plant? It's not your salvation, it's your signal. The beacon to the parts of your being that have been buried beneath programming, shame, and synthetic distractions. You've been trained to look at cannabis as an escape, but what if it's actually an invitation? Not to run from reality, but to finally see it, clearly, completely, and without the filters that have been placed in front of your eyes since the moment you were born. The plant doesn't lie. It reveals, and once you see what it shows you, there's no going back. They call it the third eye, the seat of the soul, the doorway to realms beyond the five senses. The pineal gland, small, hidden, and overlooked, is one of the most sacred pieces of spiritual anatomy spoken of in mystery traditions across millennia. Ancient Egyptians knew this. Hindus knew this. The esoteric schools of thought scattered across the earth, separated by oceans and time, all pointed to the same truth. When the pineal is awakened, perception shifts from outer illusion to inner knowing. And the plant? It was never separate from that process. Cannabis is not a shortcut. It's an activator. In the time before modern medicine repackaged truth in pills and patents, sages understood that consciousness wasn't confined to the physical brain. The pineal was more than a gland. It was an antenna, a receiver and transmitter of subtle energy, a biological interface with the divine. And substances that interacted with it weren't drugs. They were gateways, sacred tools, not to be abused, but to be honored. Cannabis, when approached with reverence and intention, gently engages this center, not in a hallucinatory, chaotic way, but through a soft dissolving of the static. The noise dims, thoughts slow, the edges of separation blur, and in the stillness, something stirs behind your eyes, not vision but sight, the kind of sight that doesn't rely on light to see, the kind that sees through you. This is what ancient initiates sought, not intoxication, but illumination. The modern world has tried to blind you. Through fluoride-laced water, overexposure to artificial light, mental distraction, and chemical sedatives, the pineal has been calcified, shut down. But Thoth reminds you, what has been suppressed can be reawakened. You are not broken, you are dormant. And this is where cannabis becomes a tool, not for everyone, not at all times, but for those ready to feel more than they think. When the plant enters the body, it doesn't force, it invites. It doesn't scream, it whispers. It aligns with the endocannabinoid system, a beautifully orchestrated internal network that science only recently began to uncover. But ancient wisdom has always known, this system is not just biological, it is spiritual. It is a receptor network for the Earth's vibrational medicine. The frequencies that cannabis carries are not random. They are encoded with intention. This is why some people feel anxious when they smoke. It's not the plant creating fear, it's the plant amplifying what's already buried inside. It's revealing what your ego has locked away. It's not making you paranoid, it's making you aware. That discomfort, that's where the work begins. In ceremonial settings, the use of cannabis was often paired with silence, breathwork, drumming, and meditation. The goal wasn't escape, it was entry into the temple within. The pineal was the altar, the breath was the offering, and the plant, it was the key. This isn't the story you were told. They gave you a version where cannabis was chaos, laziness, confusion. But in truth, cannabis becomes chaotic only in a chaotic mind. In a quiet mind, it becomes a doorway, a light switch flipped in a dark room. It's not the plant that defines the experience. It's your state of being when you enter the space with it. Thoth doesn't offer dogma. He offers discernment. There's a reason the pine cone appears in ancient artwork held by gods and pharaohs, carved into staffs and sacred sites. It wasn't decorative. It was symbolic of the pineal. A message passed through time. Your evolution begins in your perception, and perception begins in the mind's true eye. They've mocked this gland, dismissed it, blinded it, but that doesn't erase its function. It only makes rediscovering it more powerful. The moment you realize that you can see beyond what you've been shown, that's when your freedom begins. And cannabis, when used with clarity, can help you find the door. Not every dose opens it. Not every person is ready. This isn't a magic trick or an instant awakening. It is a relationship, a practice, a remembering. You are not just bones and thoughts. You are light folded into form, and the pineal is the lens through which that light begins to remember itself. Let go of the fear they've placed around the plant. Let go of the shame you may have attached to using it. Those were never yours. They were given to you by a system that fears what you might become if you ever start to see with your whole self. The war on cannabis was never about cannabis. It was a war on what the plant could awaken within you. A war on the soul, disguised as a war on the substance. When governments criminalized it, when the media demonized it, when society laughed at those who used it, they weren't just targeting a plant. They were targeting your ability to perceive clearly, feel deeply, and connect inwardly. Because once you touch that still, wordless knowing within you, the world's illusions start to fall apart. And a person who sees clearly is impossible to control. Ask yourself why the same systems that push pharmaceuticals without question have spent decades locking people away for growing a plant. Why the very institutions that profit off your sickness and stress have painted nature's medicine as a threat. It isn't because it makes people dangerous. It's because it makes them free. Consciousness cannot be controlled when it's awake. That's the truth they've spent generations trying to bury. The education system teaches memorization, not realization. The media feeds you opinions, not truth. Entertainment distracts, religion pacifies, and politics divides. But cannabis, when used with awareness, breaks those patterns. It slows down the loops. It reveals the artificial rhythm of the external world and introduces you to a deeper, slower, more natural current, one that runs through all things, including you. This is why Thoth speaks now, because the illusion is wearing thin, because the war on consciousness hasn't ended, it's just taken new forms. Today, they don't always need to arrest you. They just need to keep you scrolling. They need you distracted, overstimulated, disconnected from your intuition. They want you productive, but not present, entertained, but not enlightened, stressed, but not questioning, because questioning leads to clarity, and clarity is contagious. The old systems feared mystics, not because they were irrational, but because they were untouchable. They couldn't be manipulated by fear, because they had tasted something greater. They weren't loyal to governments or markets or doctrines. They were loyal to truth. And truth, once experienced directly, can never be taken away. That's what cannabis threatened. Not society, not order, but the illusion that either of those things were ever real in the first place. When you light up with intention, you're not getting high. You're stepping out of the programming, out of the noise, out of the identity they crafted for you. The stories you were fed about success, normality, adulthood, they start to unravel. You begin to remember that you weren't always like this. There was a time you were in tune, curious, deeply connected, and the more you remember, the harder it becomes to go back to sleep. This is the real risk of cannabis. Not addiction, not laziness, not harm. The real risk is clarity. The risk is remembering who you were before the world told you who to be, because a person who remembers becomes sovereign, and sovereignty cannot be sold, controlled, or contained. That's why they waged this war. They couldn't outlaw meditation. They couldn't ban daydreaming. But a plant, a physical object that could be identified, grown, shared, that could be outlawed. So they did. And they wrapped it in layers of shame, stigma, and misinformation so thick that even those who used it forgot its sacredness. But that doesn't erase its essence. You can burn every book, shut every mouth, censor every video, but you cannot unroot what the earth keeps offering. The plant keeps growing, and it keeps whispering. And some of us have started to listen again. This moment, right now, is your invitation to join that remembering. The war on consciousness continues, but so does the awakening. Every time you question what you've been taught, every time you choose presence over distraction, every time you honor the sacred instead of the superficial, you are stepping off the battlefield and into your own power. And the more of us who do that, the less power they have. From the moment you were old enough to ask questions, The answers were already chosen for you. You didn't explore the world. You were shown a version of it, filtered and pre-approved. And when you began to see cannabis, it wasn't presented as sacred. It was presented as a threat, a joke, a crutch. The plant wasn't criminalized in your mind by law. It was criminalized by shame, by mockery, by the quiet, consistent messaging that only failures used it, that only slackers, addicts, and burnouts touched it. That's how deep the programming goes, not through fear, through ridicule. Because when you laugh at something, you don't question it. You don't investigate it. You just dismiss it. They didn't need to burn the temples anymore. They just had to change what you thought was sacred, replace spirit with stigma, turn initiation into indulgence. They made sure you'd never look twice. And if you did, they'd have your own inner critic do the job for them. That voice in your head whispering, "This is bad. This is wrong. This is weak." But here's what they never told you. That voice isn't yours. It was installed. The system didn't just demonize the plant. It trained you to demonize yourself for feeling drawn to it, so that if you ever did explore it, you'd carry guilt in one pocket and confusion in the other. You'd go in already disconnected from the very reverence needed to unlock its power. That was the strategy. Don't just block access, pollute the access point. You were never supposed to sit with the plant in silence. You were never supposed to enter a meditative state with it. You were never supposed to ask it questions, treat it with respect, or approach it as an ally. You were supposed to misuse it, abuse it, laugh at it, forget it. Because the moment you remembered, truly remembered, everything else would start to unravel. What they fear isn't cannabis. It's your relationship with it when it becomes conscious. When the joint isn't about escape, but return. When the pipe isn't about disconnection, but deeper presence. When the ritual becomes sacred again. Because here's what happens when you engage the plant intentionally. You begin to observe your own mind, the loops, the noise, the judgments, the distractions. You feel the tension you've been living with for so long it became normal. You notice the way your thoughts race, how quickly you avoid stillness, how fast you reach for your phone or your task or your mask. And in that space, you see it clearly for the first time. You've been running from yourself. That's the secret buried beneath all the stigma. Cannabis doesn't dull you. It mirrors you. It amplifies whatever you're holding. If you're scattered, it shows you the mess. If you're anxious, it reveals the cage. But if you're present, if you enter with calm intention, it opens a doorway into parts of you that were buried by noise. And once that door is opened, the world can never look the same again. That's why Thoth calls this plant not a drug, but a threshold. A tool for initiation if you approach it with humility, not to get something from it, but to give something up. The mask, the identity, the performance, the conditioned need to be something other than what you truly are. You don't use this plant to become something. You use it to unbecome everything that isn't you. And the irony? Those who mock the plant most loudly are often the ones running hardest from their own truth. They've never sat in stillness with it, never dared to meet the version of themselves that emerges when the performance fades. But you're here. That means you've already started remembering, and that remembering is sacred. So be mindful of how you approach it. This isn't about blindly romanticizing cannabis. It's about unlearning what you were taught and returning to what you already knew, deep down, that the earth doesn't create by accident, that every medicine has a soul, and that every soul, when ready, finds its way back to the medicine it once knew. You were never supposed to know this, but you do now. The question is, what will you do with it? It's not just a plant. It never was. Cannabis is not some passive herb sitting quietly in the background of human history. It's alive in a way most have forgotten how to recognize, conscious, aware, and deeply encoded with intelligence that doesn't speak in words, but in frequencies. The kind of intelligence you can't measure in laboratories, but you feel in your bones when you finally sit still long enough to hear it. Cannabis isn't here to entertain you. It's here to teach you. And for thousands of years, that's exactly what it did, until the world got too loud to listen. Modern science barely scratches the surface. It measures cannabinoids, receptors, chemical structures, but it doesn't ask what the plant knows. It doesn't acknowledge that nature, in its complexity, does not build by accident. Everything serves a purpose. And cannabis, when you strip away the noise of stigma, carries the unmistakable blueprint of a guide. Not a guide for everyone, not a guide all the time, but a guide nonetheless, subtle, firm, and unwavering in what it reveals. Thoth calls it a green messenger, not because it brings messages from somewhere else, but because it draws them out of you. It speaks in stillness, in presence, in insight that arrives not as a thought, but as a shift in being, a sudden knowing, a wave of truth that moves through your chest and stays. It's not the kind of knowledge you read, it's the kind you remember, and that's the difference between information and wisdom. The world is drowning in information, but wisdom, that comes in whispers. And those whispers, those moments of clarity, of sudden peace, of deep connection, are the plant's voice. But what happens when you treat intelligence like entertainment? When you ignore the sacred and use the plant to run instead of return? You dull the signal. You turn medicine into noise. And eventually, you stop hearing it at all. That's the tragedy of misuse. Not moral failure, but missed connection. You turn the teacher into background static. You flood the signal with ego, distraction, habit, and then you wonder why the plant no longer opens doors. It still holds the keys, but you're no longer knocking. Cannabis doesn't care about your image, your reputation, your need to look cool, spiritual, or free. It isn't here for aesthetics. It's here for alignment. And it will meet you at your level of readiness. The question is never, what strain should I use? Or, how strong should it be? The real question is, am I prepared to receive what this plant is willing to show me? Because if you are, it will show you exactly what needs to be seen, especially the parts you'd rather avoid. This is why sacred use is about preparation, intention, presence. You wouldn't walk into a temple drunk, screaming, and half distracted. But people enter the space of this plant with cluttered minds, numb bodies, and scattered energy, and wonder why nothing changes. Yet, those who approach it like a living being, who create ritual, who listen, who surrender, often speak of transformation, of revelations. Not because the plant is magical, but because they were finally still enough to hear. Plants are sentient in ways that challenge human arrogance. They don't need language to communicate. They speak through feeling, vibration, and intuition. You've been taught to only trust what you can explain, what you can dissect. But some truths can't be cut open. They can only be sat with, and cannabis is one of them. You weren't disconnected from plant intelligence because it failed you. You were disconnected because you were taught to stop listening, to see green as background, to see nature as a product, to see the sacred as superstition, and so you looked away. But the plant has waited, patiently, silently, growing through concrete, through lies, through propaganda, through decades of demonization. It never stopped reaching toward the light, and now it reaches for you, not to fix you, not to save you, but to remind you that you were never broken. You were just disconnected from the message. You don't need more data. You don't need more opinions. You need stillness. You need sincerity. You need the courage to sit with the intelligence that doesn't speak in your language, but knows exactly who you are. You ignored the messenger, but it never stopped calling. Transformation was never supposed to happen in a classroom or a church pew. It was supposed to happen in silence, in stillness, in communion, with yourself, with the earth, with the energies you've forgotten how to feel. The ancients knew this. Thoth knew this. True alchemy has nothing to do with turning metal into gold. The real work is turning unconsciousness into awareness, fear into presence, lead into light. And cannabis, when used as it was meant to be, is one of the sacred tools for that inner alchemy. You've been taught to measure life by what's outside of you. achievement, appearance, approval. But alchemy starts on the inside. It begins where no one else can see, where the pain lives, where the noise echoes, where the masks get heavy and the truth gets buried. That's where the plant does its work, not by forcing change, but by creating a space where change becomes inevitable. Cannabis isn't the change, it's the catalyst. It softens the walls. It dissolves the illusions you've been taught to protect. It doesn't offer escape, it offers confrontation. But not the kind that shouts, the kind that whispers just loud enough to be undeniable. The kind of confrontation that comes when you're alone, when the thoughts get quiet, and you finally meet the parts of yourself you've been avoiding. That's where the work begins. When you engage the plant consciously, you're not just altering your state, you're entering a laboratory, one where the subject is your own soul. The process is ancient. You breathe, you feel, you listen. And what arises isn't random. It's the residue of everything you've repressed, the pain you never processed, the shame you pretend isn't there, the dreams you buried under practicality. They come up not to torment you, but to be transmuted, because they can't hold power over you once you see them clearly. This is why the path isn't always comfortable. Inner alchemy never is, but it's real, and real is rare. You've been sold a version of cannabis that's surface level. Music, munchies, giggles, escape. They've hidden its depth because they knew what it could really do. They knew that a person who learns how to transmute their own pain doesn't need a system to save them. A person who knows how to create peace within doesn't buy distraction. They don't cling to labels, to fear, to false identities. They become dangerous, not because they hurt others, but because they can't be manipulated. And that's what Thoth offers through this teaching. Not a substance, but a sacred mirror. The chance to witness your inner world without judgment. To see where you're stuck and why. To observe how you shrink, how you perform, how you forget yourself, and then gently begin to shift it. That is the essence of alchemy. Not the denial of shadow, but the transformation of it. Not escaping pain, but extracting power from it. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to be honest. The plant doesn't expect anything else. It meets you where you are. But it won't let you lie to yourself while you're there. And this is where the misconception ends. People say cannabis makes you lazy. No, it reveals your resistance. People say it makes you paranoid. No, it shows you what's already hidden beneath the surface. People say it's a crutch. But a crutch only exists if you're trying to walk the same path that broke you. What if this plant was never meant to help you walk the old path, but to lead you to a new one entirely? A path where presence replaces performance, where awareness replaces anxiety, where you stop trying to become someone and start remembering who you already are beneath the layers of programming and pain. This isn't about glorifying a plant. This is about restoring the sacred. You are not just flesh and memory. You are energy, intention, and awareness. The real gold of alchemy isn't found in things. It's found in the self that emerges when all else is stripped away. And that self? It's been waiting for you all along. The divine was never far. You were just taught to look for it in the wrong direction, in stone buildings, in distant skies, in doctrines written by men who never wanted you to meet God without going through them first. But the sacred was never outside of you. It's in the silence behind your thoughts, in the stillness beneath your fear, in the breath you forgot to honor, and sometimes in the smoke that rises from a sacred plant held with reverence, not habit. That path, ancient, direct, unfiltered, was buried because it couldn't be controlled. Cannabis was one of the earth's original messengers, not to distract you from the divine, but to remind you of it. You weren't supposed to need middlemen. You weren't supposed to need translations. You were supposed to feel it for yourself. Direct connection. No rituals you didn't understand. No hierarchies between you and what created you. Just presence. Just awareness. Just you and everything. But that kind of power, it's dangerous to systems that rely on your dependence. That's why they called it a sin. That's why they smeared it with propaganda, banned it, and buried its sacred uses under piles of fear and fabricated science. Because a person who uses cannabis with true intention doesn't just get high, they get clear. They sit down, breathe, close their eyes, and remember that they are not separate from the source they've been taught to worship like an outsider. They don't chase God. They become still enough to feel God within. That's not rebellion. That's remembrance. But to the system, remembrance is the ultimate threat. Thoth reminds you, the divine isn't reached by climbing some heavenly ladder. It's accessed by dropping into your own awareness, into the body, the breath, the now. Cannabis, when used as a spiritual technology, was one of the sacred tools that helped break the trance of separation. It gently dissolves the ego's constant narration. It quiets the inner judge. And what's left in that silence isn't emptiness. It's truth. It's connection. It's the whisper of divinity, not as something you believe in, but something you are. But most people were never given that option. They were taught cannabis was for losers, for addicts, for the lazy and lost, not for seekers, not for the wise, not for those who longed to touch the divine directly. So the real tragedy isn't just what they outlawed, it's what they redefined. They turned a spiritual bridge into a cultural punchline. And yet, the path remains. It was never erased, just hidden, under shame, under ridicule, under years of misuse. But the ones who remember know it's still there. And you don't need robes or rituals or 10,000 hours of training. You just need to return to the breath, to the intention, to the reverence you carry in your own soul. Cannabis isn't God, but it's a key that fits a lock you've been carrying in your chest your whole life. You don't use it to worship. You use it to dissolve the illusion that you're separate from what you're worshipping in the first place. You use it not to ascend, but to root deeper, to remember that divinity doesn't arrive when you finally become something. It reveals itself when you finally let go of everything that told you you're not enough. And that's why it was taken from you. Because it doesn't sell you salvation. It shows you that you were never broken. And when people remember that, really remember that, they stop chasing, they stop consuming, they stop performing, and they start living in alignment with the quiet, untouchable truth that they are already whole. That kind of awareness can't be taxed, can't be marketed, can't be controlled. And that's exactly why it's sacred. Something is shifting. You can feel it. The narratives are cracking, the shame is thinning, and the memory of what was once sacred is starting to return. Cannabis, once exiled from temples and tossed into back alleys, is making its way back into the hands of those who remember. Not just for relief, not just for rebellion, but for reconnection. What we're witnessing isn't a trend. It's a renaissance, a return to conscious use, a reclamation of meaning. But this time, it's not priests or pharaohs leading the way. It's the everyday person, quietly lighting a joint and choosing to sit with their soul instead of scroll through another distraction. It's those who've turned away from synthetic solutions and started asking deeper questions. What if healing isn't found in more? What if it's found in less noise, less judgment, more breath, more being? And what if this plant, so mocked and misunderstood, was placed here to help us remember how to listen? This isn't about idolizing the plant. It's about restoring your relationship with it. You see, what was sacred can become sacred again, but only if you approach it that way. When cannabis is used without intention, it dulls. But with reverence, it refines. It brings focus. It returns you to your body, your breath, your now, and in that presence, the healing begins. This is what the system fears most. Not people using weed to escape, but people using it to awaken. Because awakened people stop chasing the promises of a broken world. They stop buying identities. They stop reacting and start responding. They stop outsourcing their power and begin to root into something far more dangerous to control: sovereignty. And now, as more of us begin to use consciously, something is happening. Conversations are changing, rituals are returning, the air around the plant is clearing. The old stories, Stoner, burnout, dropout are being replaced by new ones. Seeker, healer, alchemist. This is the silent revolution they didn't see coming. The kind that doesn't march in the streets but meditates in stillness. That doesn't shout over others but listens within. That doesn't overthrow systems with violence, but starves them by simply refusing to feed them with our energy. Because when you begin to live from inner clarity, the external noise loses its grip. You stop needing to numb. You stop fearing your own thoughts. You stop shrinking to fit in. And you begin to remember, the most radical act in this world isn't escape, it's presence. So light your incense, brew your tea, prepare the space, and if the plant calls to you, meet it with respect. Not to get high, but to get honest. Not to disconnect, but to drop in. Let it guide you, not into forgetfulness, but into remembrance. And let that remembrance ripple into your choices, your relationships, your voice. Because if even a handful of people begin to live this way, the impact is immeasurable. Every person who chooses to sit with their truth rather than run from it weakens the foundation of systems built on fear. Every moment of presence chips away at a culture obsessed with performance. And every conscious use of the plant sends a signal, quiet, potent, and unstoppable, that we are remembering. And if you've made it this far, then you already feel it. You're part of it. The plant is returning. The sacred is rising. And this time, no one's waiting for permission. You don't need to burn down the system to change it. You just need to stop feeding it your mind. And that's what they're terrified of, because they've built an entire world on the assumption that you'll never look inward, never ask deeper questions, never remember who you were before they told you what to be. But now the tides are shifting. Quietly, steadily, people are waking up. And they're not marching, they're meditating. Not consuming, they're creating. Not escaping, but remembering. Cannabis, when used with reverence, is not a shortcut. It's a mirror. And the truth is, most people aren't afraid of the plant. They're afraid of what they'll see when they're finally alone with their own reflection. But that's the initiation. That's where the path begins. Not in knowing more, but in finally being willing to see clearly. And clarity doesn't come from chaos. It comes from stillness. The plant reminds you of that. Every time. It brings you back to your body, your breath, your essence. It slows down the noise long enough for the soul to speak. Thoth taught that all transformation begins within. As above, so below. As within, so without. What you cultivate in your inner world echoes into the outer. And when that inner world begins to shift, from numbness to awareness, from fear to curiosity, from shame to presence, the outer world starts to lose its grip. You begin to live on a different frequency, one that no longer responds to manipulation, distraction, or division. Cannabis is not the answer. It's a doorway, a key, and like all keys, it depends entirely on what you choose to unlock with it. You can use it to sleep through your life, or to wake up from it. You can use it to avoid yourself, or to finally meet yourself. And when approached with humility, it becomes a sacred ally in the work of inner alchemy, turning heaviness into light, confusion into clarity, illusion into insight. This isn't about glorifying a plant. It's about reclaiming a relationship that was stolen from you, one that your ancestors understood, one that was buried under decades of propaganda, fear, and control. But it was never lost, just forgotten, and now it's calling you back, not for escape, but for remembrance. So here you are, on the edge of a choice, to go back to sleep, or to lean into awareness, to keep playing the part you were handed, or to step into your own authorship. And while the system would prefer you sedated, distracted, and scrolling, the truth is, your awakening is the greatest threat to their illusion. Because awakened people don't follow scripts. They write new ones. Awakened people don't fear silence. They make it sacred. Awakened people don't chase meaning. They become it. And the more of us who wake up, the harder it becomes to keep the illusion alive. That's why your path matters. That's why every conscious moment counts. Because the revolution isn't out there. It's in here, in your breath, your awareness, your intention. And once you begin to live from that place, nothing outside you has the same power anymore. Not the media, not the system, not even the fear. Let them keep pushing their distractions. Let them keep selling their versions of success. You've already seen behind the curtain. You know there's more. And you don't need permission to step into it. If you haven't yet, join us inside Insights Academy. The deeper layers of this journey are unfolding there. And for now, you'll still receive a free copy of The Kabbalion. But that offer won't last forever. Don't miss the door just because it's quietly open. Remember, you weren't born to comply. You were born to awaken. The plant was never the enemy. It was the invitation. And now, it's your move. If this video resonated with you, let us know by commenting. I understood it.